Hello, hello. Welcome. I don't have a name for my show at the moment. I just wanted to spend my last semester here talking with interesting people on interesting topics. I honestly, while I was swimming earlier and I should have thought of something interesting to say in like a little radio monologue, but I didn't. I was focused on the grind. So I'm here with Anton, my good friend.
Hello. Glad to join you, Andy.
Yeah. And today I just want to talk about history. So Anton and I met on a church couch. Well, actually, no, we met at Spring Fling.
Yeah,
because you showed up at Spring Fling, and then I saw you around the parish, and I was like, "Is that the guy that was at Spring Fling?"
I'm hard to miss. I'm a big guy. You know?
Yeah. You're not that. You have a Russian physique.
Yeah. I think it's the beard. It's the beard that puts it all together.
Yeah. And we were on this couch for like 2 hours talking about basically just Russia, right? I think for me, Russia's my favorite. I would say it's probably my favorite country in terms of history. Maybe France beats it for me. I'm a Francophile as well.
Okay.
But, France is awesome because they just do things, right?
Well, there's a lot of, there's a very close relationship between France and Russia, closer than you would imagine with the geographic sort of distance.
Okay.
France inspired a lot of culture in Europe, and even as far as Russia. I mean, a lot of Russian nobles during what we would call, the golden era of the imperial Russian aristocracy. I mean, they would speak French, and,
really?
And a lot of their their cultural norms were French.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, and then there's a lot, today we're going to talk a little bit about the revolution, I think. And I think there's, you would have to be an absolute ape brain not to be able to see that, there are a lot of parallels between the French and the Russian revolutions. In fact, the Bolsheviks made no secret of the fact that they were
modeled after the French.
They especially like the purges were modeled specifically after, Robespierre's.
Oh, really? Okay. So I'm still just like entering into more academic history territory because for a while it was just podcasts, history podcast.
Yeah. Well, those are fine. Those are good.
Yeah. Was Robespierre a Jacobin?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay,
my French Revolution understanding isn't super great. It's not something that I've excessively studied, but he was. There was Marat, who was a very famous. I don't know if you've heard of him. He died in a bathtub. Kind of an interesting story.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those guys, and Robespierre in particular was a real. He was a pacifist, but he killed however many people.
Yeah, and then.
But they believed very, very firmly in what they were doing.
Yeah.
I think there's people who join these movements, and they join because it's about the power, or it's about the money.
Or they're just young guys.
Or they're just and here's the thing though, because young guys and even older guys or women, whatever, who join a movement like that because they think they're making a positive change. I don't think that they should or can be judged in the same way that, somebody who's just doing it for the power. Or whatever. Now, in terms of Robespierre, I mean, it's really hard to, I try just generally not to pass judgment on historical figures because I think it's a very stupid thing to do.
Oh, like the causation's so difficult.
Right, exactly. You can't really put yourself in the mental headspace of that time, of that era, like with the Russian Revolution, you got to realize that these people who are following, the banner and everything, they were coming from a sort of a cultural matrix of very, the peasants especially. It was not a good time to be alive as a peasant or a poor person.
No.
Especially in Russia.
Red lines.
And so it's like, what, you're gonna judge these people for setting up an oppressive totalitarian regime?
Maybe.
I think. Well, maybe some people might. Some people might. But I wouldn't judge these people for that, and I think it's very, very important.
Yeah.
So in terms of like Robespierre and the French Revolution, same situation, right?
Well, Robespierre was scapegoated, right? Because it was I think after the Jacobins were kind of in power for a while, it was the Thermidorian reaction. Maybe I have I might have my lineage wrong. The Thermidorian reaction was like a reaction. It was it was a little more far right,
like a reactionary movement.
Yeah. It was still like liberty, égalité, fraternité, right? But it was a reaction, and as a result, in order to kind of cleanse themselves, wipe their hands, dust their hands of the previous regime, they just scapegoated Robespierre. That's why Robespierre is honestly not as important of a historical figure as people might think he is. I think he kind of retroactively gained this perspective as a vilified figure.
Like he did oversee the execution of many people. I think that's where his fame comes from.
Yeah, but I think the Thermidorian reaction really kind of concentrated and converged all the blame on him, so they could get previous government ministers still around. I could be misremembering.
Well, that may be so. Like I said, I'm not really. It's not really my field, so to speak. I'm a physicist. I mean, I don't know. I don't know anything. But, no, I mean. Yeah, that's definitely. But going back to the Russian Revolution, I think that there was a lot of conscious and unconscious parallels with France.
Oh yeah.
So no matter how far away in the world you go, you really can't get away from French culture, right?
Yeah. Are you when you say conscious and unconscious parallels? Big question. Are you a Hegelian?
In terms of like dialectics and things like that?
Well, in terms of as I understand, like cognizant patterns of like history, right? Like Hegel's philosophy of history, as I understand it, is recognizing like progressions and convergences and dialectics of history towards certain ideas and such.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't really have a concrete philosophy in terms of history in mind. I'm not really. I don't really look at history, and I've never really studied history in a sort of contextual way. And I think that sometimes I do think of it that way, but I can't say that I have thought about it that way for enough time to really solidify an opinion. I will say that I think there's enough randomness in the progression of history. There's enough stuff that happens sort of out of the corner of nowhere. Like the Mongols, right, in Europe, they came out of nowhere.
They came out of nowhere, created the first world order. Actually, the first universal human order.
Totally changed the dynamic in Europe. And we can't really, that's not something that can be predicted. Now, that's not really, that's like a super simple thing that, anybody who's like a Hegelian or understands these things will probably be laughing at me back home. But it's just, I don't really think about it that way, so I couldn't answer your question. Sorry to say that.
Oh, I gotta turn my mic down. I'm way too loud.
You signed me as the audio engineer, and I don't know what the hell I'm doing. It's my first time in here.
I'm just watching the levels. I'm just having you tell me if anything freaky happens in the head. Can you still hear us?
Yeah. I mean, you sound fine.
And like again, like okay, like the Russian. With the Russian Revolution, specifically like the Bolsheviks, like their mandate of heaven was basically history, right? Like their mandate of history. They kind of feigned a bit of a popular mandate with, the Constituent Assembly, which was immediately dissolved, here's
the thing, right? Yeah. I would say that you can't just say the Bolsheviks, right? Because Lenin was a big guy. Like he was a big thinker, and he made a lot of changes to Marxist philosophy. And so that's why you have Marxist Leninism. But it's super, super important to recognize that it's Marxism, right? And Marxism is what puts the historical mandate on things.
And Lenin was a doer, because all the Mensheviks were like, we have to let the bourgeois revolution happen first, and like Lenin was like, we had 8 months, let's go.
So Lenin is very, very interesting in a Marxist sort of swing of things, because Marxism, the progression of Marxism, right? The classical progression of Marxism from
feudalism, capitalism, communism.
Right, correct. So people sometimes throw socialism in there. But what Lenin said was, well, Russia is feudal, so we just have to skip. You have to skip a step and just drive it into direct communism. And that's why towards the end of Lenin's life, the NEP happened. Right, the new economic plan. Or I'm not sure what the translation into English is, but and that's why that happened. And that's actually the NEP was a huge thing. It was a sort of a capitalist mini revolution that happened towards the end of his life, which was then of course considered a little bit too far gone for Marxism.
Well, but as I understood it though, I would say like the Bolshevik Party, though, still kind of had like I think so. This is the way I think about it: is every ruler has a mandate conferred upon them. And in previous like monarchies, it's God, like God direct mandate. Obviously, democracies, you have popular sovereignty.
Right.
With the Bolsheviks, they feigned this popular sovereignty. That's why they said all power to the Soviets, right? Because the Soviet was like the legitimate, like seen as like the legitimate seat of the people.
Yeah.
Like
they're workers' councils. You know?
Yeah.
I think people get caught up on the idea of the word Soviet all the time because it sounds exotic. It's really not. It's just council. Just a council of workers. And in that sense, I mean, in the first part of what we would call the Russian Revolution, that
February.
happened, in February. Of course, that's Julian calendar or whatever. But we don't want to get into that. That whole thing, the 13-day difference. Anyway, point is, at that point, the Soviets were extremely important, and the Bolsheviks became popular within the
dual power.
Yeah, they became popular within the Soviets through hard work. I mean, they tried very, very hard, and they became popular on this idea of food redistribution and et cetera. So they did actually achieve, in my opinion, I think they did actually achieve popularity. Now, Lenin was not averse to cheating.
No,
at all. He did not. He was not a person
not scrupulous.
No, of course. Yeah, he had no interest in morality or any of that. The only thing he was interested in was advancing the revolution. That's it. It doesn't matter how you do it, as long as it's advanced. Like even at Zimmerwald. In what year was it? It was a long time before the revolution. They had a council in Zimmerwald. Have you read about it? Yeah, and he the Mensheviks, Martov and those guys, they said Russia has a right to defend itself from Germany, right? It has a right to defend itself, and it has a right to fight, and et cetera, et cetera. And Lenin says no, no. The fact that Germany will destroy Tsarism in Russia is by far the lesser evil. The greater evil, rather, is Tsarism. It's not German expansionism. But it's super, super interesting that happens, and then Germany funds propaganda in like 1916 that causes a bunch of strikes. I didn't know they funded. Obviously, everybody knows that they sent. Oh yeah, and I'm getting there. Because they put Lenin and a bunch of his guys on a sealed train.
I actually love that. That's one of my favorite pieces of World War I geopolitics. Is now geopolitics is just like World Economic Forum. It's boring as hell. But like back in the day, like Germany was like, we're going to cause unrest by sending back the most committed revolutionaries back to their country. It's like injecting a virus. It's so fun.
I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but it definitely backfired on them in the long run.
Oh yeah.
Let's just put it that way.
But it was still. Let's
not get into the sequel here. But
but still at Brest-Litovsk, like they're probably like, this was the best decision we ever made.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because the Bolsheviks, I should say, they gave away a bunch of land
like
to the
third
Germans.
Empire. Yeah,
I don't think it was that much because you got to remember they have all of Siberia, so a third is
maybe a third. Maybe thinking of like a third of like the Russian Empire territories.
Well, you got to remember, we got Ukraine. They lost or parts of it. I don't remember exactly where the borders.
That
were
was like the first part of it. Yeah, keep going.
Because importantly, right, that treaty was kind of. The Germans occupied the land, and then not so long afterwards, the Germans were totally obliterated in their own treaty. And they just kind of left. Like they just kind of scarpered to back to Germany. And at that point, you've got the first. Not to get into too far into modern events, but that's when you get the first sort of Ukrainian. Republican movements.
Yeah, what was the name of the workers or not like the workers council, but like the democratic councils that were kind of jockeying for power? There's like a name for it. It begins with like an M or something, but
I'm not sure.
Modna or something. I don't know, but yeah, there's
in
like
Ukraine specifically.
In Ukraine specifically,
I'm not sure. I'm not really. I don't speak Ukrainian. I speak Russian. I don't speak Ukrainian, which is I would like to change that. Because I think it is a really interesting language in this language.
How similar is it to Russian? Is it like for like Spanish and Italian kind of?
It's okay. So officially, linguistically speaking, it's extremely close.
Oh, okay.
Now, extremely close does not mean
like regional.
Well, no, it doesn't mean that I will understand a Ukrainian 100% of the time.
Yeah.
In fact, I would say, I've watched some Ukrainian television in the past, or heard the Ukrainian speech, and it's not. I can understand the general gist. But I wouldn't say that I can converse with them. But yeah, anyway, so then that's when, all this Ukrainian nationalism, or national identity, I shouldn't say nationalism, but national identity started to pop up because, historically before then, it was not really, there was, the Kievan Rus, if you want to go all the way back. Yeah. And then there was, Cossacks and all sorts of
national identity isn't a thing till like the freaking like reunification of Italy.
Right.
Like national identity.
Germany, yeah.
Yeah, that's like a 19th century innovation.
Right, exactly.
Like France was like a benign anarchy.
Yeah. I've heard there's a lot of guys nowadays who they think of themselves as like a national, having patriotism and things like that.
Yeah.
And I was talking to one of them recently, and he's like, yeah, like I feel really attached to the nation of Germany. It's this ancient culture. Yeah. I'm like, the nation of Germany came about in like 1866.
Years,
It's younger than America. Before that, they spoke German, but they were not.
Yeah, you're
Germans.
Prussian. You're Prussian.
Yeah, exactly. And the Prussians were half Slav anyway. Like,
really?
Let's be real.
Yeah.
They had all that Baltic influence, and Balts are it's a related sort of ethnic group. I mean, it's really silly. It's that famous quote. I forget who said it, but it wasn't the nation that created nationalism. It was nationalism that created the nation.
100%. That's how they had to market the reunification of Italy.
Right. Yeah. And it's just like
reunification, as if Italy had been unified ever before. Maybe in like 400 AD. I don't know.
Yeah. You can't really go back to the Romans at that point.
Yeah.
That's what El Duce did, and didn't end up very well for him. Mare Nostrum and all that stuff. But anyway, we're getting off track here. What was I gonna say? Anyway, I don't know if you have an actual like direction for coverage.
I'm just shooting the breeze.
I mean, I don't mind that either.
Back to my original point, where we like kind of left off is like, okay, so like I would say. The Bolsheviks did have a bit of a popular mandate in that they absolutely took over the councils, the Soviets. But one is Russia is still 90% peasantry at this point, and the peasants are like SRs through and through. They're pretty committed SRs, as much as they are politically involved, right? They're still peasants.
Yeah, I think most of them at this point would not have been what we would consider politically active.
But in as much as they were, it was usually SRs.
Well, Bolsheviks were extremely popular in the cities, extremely popular.
Oh, yeah.
And this, by the way, is a pervasive issue that will continue to affect them until like the 30s, because you've got the famines that start, right? And this is after everything is done. The war, and like they've beaten everybody else.
War,
and they've consolidated their power. They've annihilated the Social Democrats and all those people. Even then, they still have issues because out in the countryside, you've got these farmers who are, the inflation is horrific. They don't make as much money anymore, so they just start hoarding grain because they need to eat something.
Yeah, that's where the bagmen come from.
And now you've got a problem. You've got a serious problem. That's where you start talking about kulaks. You start talking about appropriation. You start getting things like the Holodomor, which was a very famous event nowadays, especially. But again, with the Holodomor, it's important to remember that it was not the only famine that was going on at the time. In fact, the Krasnodar region, which borders Ukraine, at the time was also being annihilated by this famine, which happens at the same time, but it's called the Russian famine. Which I think is a little silly, but it's really less of in my opinion. So a lot of people will take issue with this, but I think in my opinion, it was less of a strikeout against Ukrainians and more of a strike, or rather perhaps just inadequacy on the part of urban planners and urban sort of intellectuals who just don't understand how food economy works.
I agree. I think the phenomena of bagmen is one of like the funniest. I think it's like the funniest part of like at least like the early October Revolution to me, or post-October Revolution, the early Russian Civil War period, is basically like you want to talk about like history moving in cycles, like Hegelian, like the fact that basically, so for listeners that aren't aware, bagmen was basically this phenomena of the peasants didn't want the worthless money. They were producing all the food. The workers in the cities needed food, and they realized that money was worthless. So they would have these factories kind of covertly produce tradable goods. And then these bagmen would haul out in bags out to the countryside and give these tradable goods to the peasants, and then get grain, and then bring them back to the people who gave them the tradable goods, and then they'd pocket like a little commission. It basically, like, after the Russian Revolution, and we're at the most advanced stage in history, communism, we revert to barter economy.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, I was going to say,
that's history moves in cycles,
It's
man.
a great start to a new economic system, right? Like,
just bartering.
A black market of, just to get like food. I mean, the fact that there is serious economic mismanagement is not debatable. It is not a question of whether it was mismanaged. It's a question of, some people ask how much of it was intentional, especially with Holodomor. Now, it's politically relevant again. People ask, how much of it was intentional? How much of it was, I am going to starve these people in particular?
I've been, sorry, keep going. Yeah.
I was just going to say, and it's going to be a question for forever, because those, there's no actual signed orders saying, those Ukrainians, go starve them.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. We got to be conscious of that fact.
Yeah. So I listened to a podcast. I would say it's probably by a bit more of like a conservative historical commentator. It's like this Martyr Made podcast. It's some guy that's like with Jocko Willink, who I don't care about at all. I don't care about Jocko, but
Jocko, This
guy does like a legitimate, like really great podcast. And he had an episode called The Anti-Humans. And it was just about, it's just kind of this like 4 hours of like misery. I don't want to say like misery porn on air, but it's like misery porn about like Soviet treatment of like the Eastern European bloc, and it goes in like a Ukraine thing, and it's pretty rough to listen to. And his I would say his justification for this being like an intentional thing was in the party newspapers. And I don't know if it was the Pravda necessarily. That's what I think of when I think of party newspaper, but just party newspapers in general, they would publish these things about how like the only good German's a dead German, or like stuff like this.
You mean like in World War II?
No, this is post World War II. Post World War II, where it was still it was like occupation, right? But I mean, if we're talking about World War II, there's a lot. Brutal, there's a big pile of context that goes with that stuff. If we're talking about Ukraine in 1922 as opposed to 1948 or whatever, there's different situations there. In 1922, there was different directions that people wanted to take. So people in, let's just call them the Bolsheviks at this point, or the Soviet government. Yeah, the Reds.
They had two directions. One direction was they needed to feed the cities. There's these huge production cities that could not feed themselves, so they needed the food. So that's one side. And so obviously there you've got, I guess if I'm not sure, exactly on every single piece of evidence, whether or not it was intentional or not, the starvation of the farmers, not sure. It might have been a punishment for withholding grain, or, a lot of different things. There's piles and piles of testimony on this. It's hard to parse. People argue about it still to this day, who are much better equipped to do it than we are. And then on the other hand, something that is perhaps forgotten in today's conversation about like Ukraine, but also Georgia, Belarus, Estonia, et cetera. They maybe not Estonia because that came later, but anyway, the Soviet government created these socialist republics based on cultural, ethnic bounds, which never existed in the Russian Empire. The Russian Empire's point was to make everybody Russian. Everybody speaks Russian. Everybody has the same cultural norms. That is the Russian Empire. So it was sort of, whereas like, and people actually, this is an interesting point, just a quick aside. The people like in the West, they think that racism is, or they see racism as like an exclusionary thing, right? Like your skin is a different color, you're not going to get.
You're out. I think that's how it manifests in America.
But in Russia, it's a different kind of, or in the Russian Empire, I should say, it was a different kind of racism. It was your identity does not matter. You are Russian now.
Yeah.
You speak a different language, but you're going to speak Russian, and you're going to be good at it. If you want a good job and if you want to progress your life, you are going to speak Russian.
Yeah.
So it's difficult, I think, for people to understand that when they think of this sort of cultural oppression of people in America versus like Russia, right?
Yeah.
There's a difference. It's just something to be aware of.
Yeah.
Now, the Soviets created these states, these cultural, ethnographically bound states.
Yeah.
And they created a ton of issues, like the Turkmen countries, Uzbekistan, and Azerbaijan, Armenia, which later, when the Soviet authority fell apart, you had that war, Armenia, Azerbaijan, which we had the sequel to 2 years ago.
Yugoslav war kind of came out of the dissolution of...
So the Yugoslav war, the important distinction, the Yugoslav nations were never part of the Russian Empire.
Yeah, they're there's part of the. I still imagine that like the fall of the, because like the Yugoslav war was like right at the fall of the Soviet Union. It was like 94. Well, that's why I think like even if they weren't part.
I was thinking you meant like they sort of the initiation of the Yugoslav sort of country, which obviously there was a king prior to World War II. Anyway, but the Yugoslav war happened. I don't know if this is a controversial take or not. I think that it happened because the Soviet Union no longer offered a counterbalance to the United States. So, Clinton could say, okay, I'm going to bomb the piss out of these Serbians, and it would have been fine, and nobody's going to step in.
Yeah.
If the Soviet Union had still been around at that point, I don't think that would have happened.
Yeah.
I don't think that they would have been able to bomb those monasteries or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's a whole different.
Different can of worms. We're going through a lot.
You don't want to start unpeeling the Yugoslav wars because there's so much going on, and even now, like I saw in the news recently that there's again stuff in Kosovo, there's stuff in Bosnia. There's issues along ethnic lines. It's
it's the Balkans.
It's the Balkans.
But I mean, admittedly, people say like Balkanization as like a negative term, but like I guess people don't remember like the Balkan wars were extremely tragic. Like when there is like the whole we're leading up to World War I, when Romania and Bulgaria were jockeying to basically, do the like reunification of Prussia, but just in the Balkans. Yeah. Like when the Balkans like split up, admittedly it was under like European drawn lines, but the Balkans being split up basically means the conflicts there are, there's still going to be a lot of conflict, but it's fought on like a lower level, whereas like a reunified Balkan.
That's true.
A reunified Balkan state. We had the nation state basically led to the destructiveness of World War I, the nation state along with technology, right?
Yeah, tech, I was going to say.
I'm not anti-nation state per se, but like the Balkans being split up, the fighting there is pretty low level.
Well, it is low level, but it's along ethnic lines, and there's purging, and there has never been a war in that area that has not included ethnic cleansing.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, it is not a good thing. Yeah, war is always bad, Andy. Always.
Yeah, war. I know war is bad, but if the Balkans had the Balkans reunified, like, do you not think that it would maybe be worse? Because
let's look at Yugoslavia.
Okay,
Tito, right?
Okay.
Josip Broz Tito. A very important guy. Remembered mostly positively by. I couldn't say this, with any kind of authority, but I think that he's remembered mostly positively in most of the nations that made up Yugoslavia.
Okay.
Why? Because they were not squabbling over ethnic lines in a way that people were dying.
Yeah.
They were, despite him being, himself a member, I think he was a Bosnian, I can't really remember.
Okay, yeah.
But he, despite him being a member of this ethnic group, he was not, he did not favor them above everybody else.
Yeah.
That was probably one of the more peaceful times in Balkan history.
Really?
Yeah.
And that was one of the more unified times, because I think immediately of like the Balkan Wars, which is like the wars for unification. And I think that's like, obviously the world wars are like way more tragic, but I think like the Balkan Wars is actually one of the most like non-World War tragic events, most tragic non-World War events in like the 20th century. And I'm like, maybe they should be split up. That's like, but like hearing what you say about Tito is
when they do get split up, what's going to happen when they start squabbling over different parts? I shouldn't say squabbling because it makes it sound petty. The people who live
squabbling because they're smaller, right?
Yes, they're smaller, but they are an ancient group of people. All of them are, and they have their pride, and they have this land that they've lived on for many, many hundreds of years, sometimes 1,000 or more. Well, you know, they're not going to be moving. And that's why you have, you know, enclaves and exclaves and things like that over there that is very, it's hard to parse and get apart and sort of figure out. But yeah, no, I think a unified state where there's a just sort of, or a perceived as just sort of ultimate authority is positive for the Balkans. It's been demonstrated to be that way. Yeah. Could the EU do the same thing? Maybe. No. I mean, maybe. You know, we don't know. We don't know.
Well, that's
you know, the EU, whether you like it or you don't, that's a whole that's another can of worms. I don't pass judgment. I think that you know, it's a social experiment. It's a national and governmental experiment, and you know, we'll see.
Something about the EU that is really interesting, and I think this is one reason we were talking earlier out in the lobby about like America versus Europe.
In terms of city planning specifically.
City planning, yeah. But one thing that's really interesting about Europe is in America, I think in America there's a lot of like white dudes that like have a European heritage and they wish they were just more like in touch with like a European heritage.
Yeah.
Right. So like you're Russian, you have like a fairly, I mean, I don't want to say like you're fairly like in culture, but I would never call you like deracinated, right? You're fairly,
I mean, I speak Russian at home.
You have a fairly,
you know, I listen to Russian music. I try to keep up with Russian politics. I don't do that as much as I probably should, like as much as, you know, my relatives do, for instance, who live here.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and I think it's very important to keep that sort of culture.
Yeah.
Now, you know, the plastic Patty who's, you know, 20% Irish or whatever, who's talking about, you know, ergo bra or whatever the heck.
Is that a real thing that people do?
Are you kidding me? Of course.
I'm half Irish, half Scottish. So I identify as a Celt. And my point is, so I'm Celtic. There's nothing in my family or my life that at all reflects that. I think that's just the American.
Exactly. It's a melting pot.
Yeah, that's the American way. Yeah. And I think a lot of people like have these immigrant identities and they wish they could like return to that or return to some kind of like encultured identity. And this isn't like
that's definitely a movement right now.
Yeah, and that's not even like a weird like Twitter like right-wing thing. I think that's something that's, I mean, I think not being in touch with like your origins is a very new phenomena. But you go to Europe and outside of maybe France and Poland, you go to Europe and you ask them about like, like their national identity, like in Germany, like, do you like identify as like a German? Like, no, we're European. Like people in Europe like to identify as this European greater. And that's something so bizarre to us because it's like, no, we want what you are giving up. You know?
That's complicated. That's so complicated because Germany. Okay, we should never look to Germany as an example.
Yeah, that was like the first.
And I will say that why? Because Germany had a culture, a crater blasted in its cultural identity so deep by the Red Army and other the U.S. and whatever. That their cultural identity was so destroyed by World War II. So
this goes for like Netherlands. I was just saying this applies for. I was just trying to think of a European country off the top of my head that wasn't like one of the more predominantly like Catholic ones. You know?
I will note that I think one last thing about Germany. The issue with Germany in culture is that for a German to be proud of their culture is slightly a faux pas. Still to this day. I know Germans, and I've known Germans who, it's not that they're not proud of being German. It's just that it's not. They shouldn't talk about it. Basically.
Yeah. Do you think it's still like a faux pas for like to be like identify themselves with like like the Kaiserreich, right? I get that's some like that's some like Hearts of Iron.
Yeah. I mean, that's a real Paradox gamer type of move.
Yeah. Because I was just thinking of like what's like because like no one cares about the Weimar. You obviously don't want to identify with a third, but like I mean, I'm like thinking like I guess
the Kaiser was such a long time ago.
Yeah,
and also the Kaiser was responsible in part for World War I.
Yeah,
it was not popular.
Yeah,
and beyond that, nobody gives it. I don't know if I can swear on here. Probably not.
No, you see, there's like 7 words up there you can't say.
Okay, yeah. I was about to say number 1. I think I've said 1 or 2 already. I've tried not to.
I don't think you have. I would have noted because we have like a dump button in case a profanity does occur. You can cough, but like the thing is that you have to like hold the button down as you swear, and I've never gotten very good at that.
Okay. So what do I if I swear? Do I just hit the button?
If you swear, so if you're gonna swear, you can just say "oh," right? And so I held the cough. Did that work? Yeah. That just went silent, right?
Okay. But I heard the profanity in my ear.
Yeah, that's just because that's a cue.
Oh, gotcha. Okay,
that's a cue.
Interesting. Okay. That's really, it's
but then
clever.
if you do swear, then you would press, I'm not going to dump it because it wipes like 7 seconds. You press the dump button and it just completely erases the past 7 seconds.
Oh, so it's slightly delayed then.
We have a delay unit right there. It's it's 30 seconds. I've always wanted to set it to 15.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Probably, yeah. Gotcha.
Anyway, so the Kaiserreich.
Yeah, Kaiser. I don't think that people remember or really care about that stuff.
So I guess it's like, what do you identify as a German?
What do Austrians? Do you think the Austrians are being proud of the Habsburgs? Come on.
Yeah.
I think and I think to some point you are correct.
I think Vienna still has a pretty strong Viennese heritage. They're barely Austrian. Sorry, keep going. I know this is so complicated.
I've been to Vienna. I mean, they have a lot of culture.
Yeah.
I don't know how much the youth is interested in that culture.
And that's what I mean is like, I think that's a weird.
And they have all those opera houses.
Yeah. And this is something you say is like very complicated. I'm not very. I visited Austria once, right?
Yeah.
All I know is Vienna is very different from the rest of Austria.
Not like Eastern Europe or Central Europe, like the Czech Republic. They don't have that issue. The Czechs, they know they're Czech.
Yeah,
they're extremely proud of it.
Yeah.
And there are people.
Oh, that's Eastern. The more east you go, yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Czech Republic basically borders Germany.
Yeah.
It's not that far east.
Yeah.
It's further west than I think Poland. I think I'd have to look at a map.
Really?
We got to get a map in here.
I would. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's quite far west, and it's. I mean, they're Western Slavs, they're Catholics, or rather, I mean, I guess I should say
they're probably Orthodox, right?
No.
Oh, the Czechs?
They had the Hussite rebellion, so I'd say they're probably Protestant / Catholic.
Oh man, you're running me. You're taking me. I'm like running through all the.
Well, remember Jan Hus? He came from Bohemia.
Yeah.
He started the Hussite rebellion. There was a whole thing. Well, actually, to be fair, he was killed before the rebellion. But anyway, point is, they're not Orthodox either because Orthodoxy is only really in the East.
It's like the East and like the Levant a bit.
No, I mean in Europe, in the East, and then we have I don't know how far we're going to get into this, but there's the Pentarchy. And one of those things is one of those seats is Rome. Yeah. But the others are Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem.
Yeah.
That's the Pentarchy.
Yeah.
I think, to my best recollection.
Let's get to national identity. Maybe next time we can talk about that. Because this is a whole can of worms for both of us. Yeah.
We got to plan these talks out better.
Yeah. We're running through. My mind's a million miles a minute.
Yeah. But yeah, national identity, of course, nationalism makes the nation. That's when you start to get all the issues with Germany, and not just Germany. We shouldn't blame it completely on them, but you've got these national movements. They claim sort of a mandate, as you were talking about earlier, from the ancestry, from the the bloodlands, the nation. So speaking of which, I actually read a book recently called The Bloodlands about the sort of Eastern Europe and how it's been during World War II. It was sort of between these two powers that were trying to
rock and a hard place.
Exactly. So the in this book, the guy was talking about how Germany's trying to bring these people back like into a more I don't know, I wouldn't call it a feudal sort of state, but like a more nationalist, consolidated, like tied to the land type deal. Whereas the Soviets were trying to bring it forward into this like communist future, whatever.
Yeah.
And I found that I did not enjoy the book.
Really?
I
did you read the whole thing?
I didn't finish it.
Okay, good. You should not read
through.
books you don't like.
Well, no, I think you should, and I think I will finish it at some point.
Yeah.
But I did not like it, and I'll tell you why. I did not like it because it essentially, and this is a theme. There's a lot of equivalence being made between Soviet and Nazi. I don't know if that's a word I can say. Probably.
It's fine.
National Socialist, atrocities.
Yeah.
It basically sets them equal to each other.
Yeah.
And I think that is the worst possible thing that you can do as a historian.
Yeah.
And it says that
it's a very common thing too.
And also beyond that, if you're setting, the Holocaust and the mistreatment of Soviet POWs to what the Soviets were doing afterwards, by the way. That's just wrong. I mean, I don't care who you are. That's just wrong. The Nazis are the things that they did. They
anti-humans.
It beggars belief. I forget what the quote was, but it makes us sort of doubt humanity as a whole. It's one of those things that happens. Now, did the Russians do
pretty bad,
the Soviets do atrocities like Katyn Forest, for instance, Katyn? Yes, absolutely. And they denied it for many, many years. Only, I think, Yeltsin admitted it. Yes, that did happen. Yes, it's true. But I think that everything needs to be taken in and of itself. We shouldn't be trying to compare these things.
Yeah. Well, it's like Robert Conquest is like 60 million people died under the Soviets. And it's like, where are those numbers?
Well, of course, you got the Black Book of Communism.
Robert Conquest is actually, in terms of Soviet, he's a very anti-Soviet. I think he's a wonderful narrative writer. He's a great narrative writer. But I think even the most staunch anti-Soviet historians are look at Conquest books and they're like, okay, this is.
I'm not a Soviet apologist. I should say
I'm not either.
I'm not. I recognize that there is atrocities. My interest is, trying to figure out, the history in and of itself in that, about these events and things like that. I try not to, people can pass judgment. That's fine. That's your own personal opinion. I just want to know what happened, when, and how.
Yeah, I'm not. I agree. I'm not an apologist either. I think when you say and this is something I firmly believe, and you can definitely find this anywhere, is the story of World War II, as I see it, is basically World War II is the return of, I think it's the return of religion to Europe. And that sounds crazy at first, but you have Europe progressing after World War I. Everybody in Europe doubles down on the whole secular humanism. It's this whole humanism is just eliminate all suffering. We're all going to be in John Lennon's Imagine soon. It's this whole binding together.
I can't blame them.
Right.
World War I
is horrible,
terrible,
but World War I was kind of betrayed a failure of that. But instead of saying, okay, maybe we look back to goals of transcendence or such. It's that we're going to double down on this secular humanism. And then it's no secret that everybody says that communism is basically a religion. I don't think anybody true Marxist practice is basically religious. It has an eschaton, right? It has a canonical book. It has a canonical figures, right?
Yeah, but I would say, I take issue with that because I think that it is you're sort of drawing a comparison that might not be. It's not perfect. Because that's true, especially when there's the creation of the cult of personality. That is true that does happen. But it is fundamentally against religious practice, worship, that sort of thing.
I agree.
Now, whether or not it is an equivalent situation, sure. So,
if I may, if I might finish my analogy,
no, please go ahead.
I'm gonna try to refine it to this: is Europe has. The eschaton for Europe, heaven for Europe has essentially died as a goal. Essentially, this is what I see: is instead of the feudal way, Europe was not set up very efficiently for wars, for human production, for all this stuff. It wasn't until a little bit after the Protestant Reformation that we started to realign our society against, we start to realign our society in a denial of an eschaton. And we deny this eschaton, like the only good is to be found on earth. And what you have on opposite sides, on like the Axis and the Allies, is you get the communists who have an eschaton, right? The communist state. And the communists totally deny, I would say communists totally deny humanism. It is for the good of humanity. But the thing is like, I mean, the fervor that people would, lay down their lives for this eschaton.
Well, how would you define humanism?
Humanism, okay, so
but in this sort of
in this context, right? I would say communism is a bit of an enhanced humanism to an extent. Humanism is the exclusive secular humanism. I would say those two adjectives kind of point us to the right direction. Is basically the ordering of like the state and all social practices towards as much minimization of suffering on this earth and as much like pleasure and comfort on this earth.
So on paper, that's what communism is about,
right. But I would say in practice, it really more resembles, and I see this in the like messaging, like the soldier. People fought for the Reds. I mean, this is what they believed,
Yeah.
And what they believed was not this like feeble, it was not a feeble dream of we're gonna raise taxes by 5% to start a new program. People were dying for this eschaton, as I understand, like the communist, like post-scarcity, this is this like final communist state. This is what people had in their head and they died for. And in that sense, it's a lot closer to like a religious vision.
Yeah, that's true.
Then what the humanists in Europe, I mean, they were just like, let's just get democracy and let's just improve things little by little.
Yeah.
And
Lenin would call them political incompetence or whatever.
Yeah. It's just like their eyes are,
or impotence, right? Political impotence.
I would say as an analogy is the secular humanists, their eyes are, maybe looking down or forward, but the communists are always looking up, or maybe forward, but they're always looking up. And that is, and I would say the fascists,
they're looking towards a future that they want to build, and they're not concerned about the cost.
Of course,
and that comes from a lot of different people, but in part it comes from Lenin.
Of course. And then
philosophy, as we discussed a while back, that was his philosophy. He did not care.
And then you have, and I'm not equating the fascists and communists. I'm saying the fascists also believe in this Nietzsche, and Nietzsche wasn't a Nazi, but he wasn't unfamiliar, right?
Well, I don't think he ever thought about it that way.
No, but Nietzsche's influence was definitely not unfamiliar.
No, of course.
But it's this, Nietzsche totally was anti-humanist. He did not believe in like this whole like coddle, like small gains. Nietzsche was like, you lay down your life, and the ability to which you can lay down your life is what gives you greatness. And I would say fascism maybe has an eschaton in this kind of Nietzschean death drive. It's like this horror. It's like looking into like, I mean, this is like the dregs of history. Like if you look into like the pure philosophy of fascism, this is almost one of the most horrifying things possible. But it's, I mean, the fascists, I mean, the Nazi religion was all over the place. I mean, I would say the afterlife was not particularly important. It was this whole like worship of death and violence, and made the better man win. And I would say in that sense, this is like the dark eschaton. This is like this horrible eschaton.
But, let's look at it from slightly like a bigger picture.
Go
For
ahead.
the average German, they see these bread and work posters. They're not thinking about the dark eschaton. They're thinking about the economy is doing well, et cetera, et cetera. And then if you look at the Nazi leadership, right? You've got a whole gamut there. A lot of them are totally like, they completely lack morals, which shouldn't surprise anybody. A lot of them are like former chicken farmers and criminals and like petty criminals too. Not, and some of them are like, I think Himmler was like an occultist. He had all that.
They were crazy.
All that weird nonsense Odinism, that neo-paganism or whatever.
The Volkish societies. Crazy.
It's just a bunch of nonsense. I don't think they ever had a religion at all. I think that,
not a state.
I think that your point is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're making the point that their idea of a perfect society is one that is fundamentally like has Nietzschean sort of properties and is nihilistic.
The death cult, violence cult. And
now, I don't know how much, it's really hard to say how much of that really is permeating the society or not.
Yeah.
Or how much of that was their plan.
I think for the majority of Germans, just saw the Nazi party as like the party that represented Germany to an extent.
Well, they only ever had 33% of the vote.
I believe it. Oh yeah, I totally believe it.
When there were still votes.
Yeah.
So let's not, let's not go all good Germans here.
I'm not. Oh no.
There's, and I'm not saying that because I'm like offended on the Germans part. I just think it's bad history.
Yeah. No. And what I say with like World War I, the narrative of World War I that I see is basically like Europe has this anti-humanist reaction on both sides, and Europe eventually defeats this. Are
we considering the Soviet Union as Europe?
Well, whenever I say Europe, when I think of history, sorry.
Yeah. See, I try not to be that way.
I know. You're checking me on all these little things, which is good because I'm much more of an amateur. But I see this. World War II is the story of, I don't even want to say the West because Russia, I would never. But World War II is this story of, for I would say like secular humanists, is we finally defeated these like anti-humanist things, because I mean, once after World War II, basically we just dropped the Soviets. We're back to, screw the Soviets or whatever. It's this fine middle ground, this perfect middle ground is what got us through World War II. And that's like the founding myth of later, I don't want to say Europe, but the West, I would say, because that doesn't include Russia. And that's the founding myth. And that's why I say you have people that equate this whole like Nazi and like communist crime, is because both of them were pretty strictly anti-humanist. And the way people read World War II is as the triumph of like humanism.
Well, okay, but so we just talked about how communism is essentially humanism.
It's essentially humanism, but in practice.
Well, if we're talking about what happened after World War II and the split of the West and the new ideology of the West, you got to talk about the Marshall Plan. You got to talk about these UN movements.
Admittedly, I'm not as familiar with this.
You have to talk about liberalism, like actual liberalism, not liberalism as in like whatever the Americans call it now.
Yeah.
There is so much to parse there. It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's fundamentally based on mutual enrichment. Like it is the basic idea of liberalism, as I understand it, is that you can accomplish more for everybody by working together. Than by working apart. And that's the idea on the surface. Now, has that been corrupted? Are we, when we bomb Saddam Hussein, is that really like a liberalism sort of
it's a life of its own
liberal thing? No, and I don't think so personally. But that's it's a whole thing that occurred, and there had to be a new mythos constructed for it. For people to really, really believe, that they were fighting for freedom when they were, dropping napalm on those kids in Vietnam.
I know, and that mythos is based on World War II rejection of anti-humanism.
Yes. And
that's my thesis.
First the Nazis, then the communists.
First the Nazis, then the communists.
Because the Cold War it made people do just absolutely atrocious things.
Yeah, that's like my grandpa was a bomber in the Korean War. And whenever it's like Korean War, like Memorial Day, I'm like, I don't know if I should be really proud.
Well, look, I mean, there's going to be people who hear that and they're not going to be happy to hear that, because there is, everybody is a person. If somebody goes and dies in a war, that's a tragedy. Regardless of, especially if, there are people that are just, conscripted or whatever. That's horrible. That's really, really bad. It doesn't matter, Now, when we talk about the morality of different government choices, then we can sort of start to pass, if we want to, we can start to pass judgment. Like I've said, I try not to. I don't like doing that because I think it gives you bias as a historian or as a person who is observing history.
I agree.
But for me personally, and I will say my own opinion on this, I do think that, the Black Book of Communism, a lot of that is probably factual. But there is a black book of capitalism as well. And, we need to look at those both in their own contexts and realize that, a lot of the things done by these governments in these periods of time are very, very bad.
Yeah.
I don't think that is an anti-American statement. I don't think that's an anti-Soviet statement. I think that is a pro-people statement.
Yeah.
And I think that, recognizing the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia was a horrific regime that committed many atrocities. That's important. It's also important to recognize that it was Vietnam, communist Vietnam, that put a stop to it. Eventually, obviously too late, too late. It's always too late. But, let's look at those things, and everything needs to be observed and recognized. And I think that one of the worst things that we can do as historians is to look at these atrocities and try to minimize a side that we like and maximize a side that we don't like. But again, we're not trying to equate them. It's not like Mr. Bloodlands, who's trying to make them into the same thing.
It's the World War II founding myth. That's what we're founded on. It's 5 o'clock. I got to do my little station ID. You were listening to 91.9 FM WMTU Houghton. We're kind of closing to the end of our show, and I think what you said there is kind of a good closer. Do you have any? I hate to cut us off because we're. I'm on all pistons right now. I
think we should have maybe planned our discussion a little bit better. In general, I would say that, I really strongly believe that when we look at history, we need to be as objective as humanly possible. And we need to avoid inserting our own opinions as much as possible. Now, after we're done talking about history and we are now, talking as individuals, and then we can say, the Hitler guy is a real jerk, or whatever. That's fine. That's even good. But that's separate. We got to keep that separate. History needs to be a science as much as any other objective science. I think. Because everything else is just politics. Right.
Well, thank you, Anton. Are you planning on coming next week?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, all right.
Sure.
Maybe we can, I don't know, maybe we could stretch this out to 2 hours. I don't know. Maybe just
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I'm fine with that, yeah.
All right. In that case, this is Andy Marr and Andy Martin and Anton Smirnoff signing off. Good night and good luck.